Chapter 11. The Western Women's Movement, Section 1. The Genesis of Liberation. Theoretical Foundations. Liberation often begins with a critical shift in perception. It is the moment when what was once seen as natural or just how things are is recognized as unjust, harmful, or inequitable. This awakening can occur in the home, in the workplace, or within the legal and cultural fabric of a society. In the Western context, the seeds of this realization were sown during the 18th and 19th century Enlightenment, a period of profound philosophical and political change. Enlightenment thinkers championed ideas of universal rights and challenged the authority of established institutions like the church and monarchy. These intellectual currents, which also fueled early abolitionist and labor movements, planted the idea that rights to property, education, and legal personhood were not just privileges but fundamental human entitlements. Women would later seize upon these very principles to demand their own equality. To frame the academic study of feminism, we use a variety of theoretical lenses. Liberal feminism. This perspective focuses on achieving equality under the law and within existing political and social structures. Liberal feminists advocate for reforms that ensure women have the same access to education, employment, and political participation as men. Radical feminism. This theory views patriarchy, a system of male power and dominance, as the root cause of female oppression. Radical feminists argue that this system is deeply embedded in culture, institutions, and norms, requiring a fundamental structural transformation, not just legal reform, to achieve true liberation. Socialist feminism/Marxist feminism. This framework analyzes how gender and class intersect to create a unique form of oppression. It highlights how capitalism and the division of labor exploit women's work, particularly unpaid domestic and care labor, which is essential for the economy but often goes unrecognized and uncompensated. Intersectional feminism. Post-colonial/transnational feminisms. These theories challenge the idea of a universal female experience. They recognize that gender inequality is not a monolithic issue. It is experienced differently based on a woman's race, ethnicity, colonial history, class, sexuality, and geography. This perspective critiques earlier feminist frameworks for often centering the experiences of white, middle-class women and advocates for an approach that addresses multiple, overlapping forms of oppression. Recent scholarship expands these foundational theories to address new frontiers. For example, studies of digital gender-based violence, DGBV, and algorithmic bias examine how technology can encode and amplify gender stereotypes. The re-examination of reproductive rights in light of political threats and the connection between environmental justice, climate change, and women's liberation demonstrate that feminist theory must continually evolve to remain relevant. Section 2. The Western Women's Movement, a historical overview. The waves metaphor is a common way to trace the evolution of feminist thought and activism, though it's important to remember its limitations. It is largely Western-centric and can oversimplify complex, overlapping histories. First wave, mid-19th to early 20th centuries. This wave was primarily focused on securing civil and political rights, particularly suffrage, the right to vote. Rooted in the abolitionist movement, key figures like Mary Wollstonecraft laid the philosophical groundwork for women to be recognized as legal and political persons. Major achievements include New Zealand granting women the right to vote in 1893, followed by the United Kingdom in 1918, for some women, full suffrage in 1928, and the United States in 1920 with the 19th Amendment. A major limitation of this wave was its focus on the rights of primarily white, property-holding women, often excluding marginalized women of color. Second wave, 1960s to 1980s. This wave broadened the feminist agenda beyond suffrage to address systemic inequalities. The movement tackled issues like reproductive rights, for example the 1973 Roe v. Wade decision in the U.S., workplace equality, sexual harassment, domestic violence, and the gender division of labor. Radical feminists explicitly named patriarchy as a force in society, while socialist feminists highlighted the economic exploitation of women's labor. This period saw the rise of cultural critiques that challenged media representations and social norms around sexuality and family. Third wave, 1990s to 2000s onward. Arising from critiques of the second wave's limitations, the third wave embraced intersectionality, celebrating the diversity of female identities and experiences. It incorporated queer issues and gave more attention to race, class, and colonial history. Activism became increasingly global and digitally mediated, with activists using zines, blogs, and the early internet to build communities and spread ideas. This wave was also characterized by a heightened awareness of backlash against feminist gains and a focus on reclaiming traditionally feminine traits while dismantling rigid gender roles. Contemporary/fourth wave/digital feminism, while still debated as a distinct wave, this period is defined by a renewed surge of activism powered by digital technologies. Movements like #MeToo and #TimesUp have used social media to expose widespread sexual harassment and assault, creating a global conversation. This wave engages directly with online spaces, addressing issues of cyber violence, algorithmic bias, and disinformation, demonstrating how feminism must adapt to a world where digital and physical realities are increasingly intertwined. Section 3, a summary of Western feminism, achievements, critiques, and challenges. Western feminist movements have secured significant legal and social milestones, including suffrage, property rights, workplace protections, and, in many jurisdictions, reproductive rights. They have fundamentally reshaped cultural norms, enabling women to enter professions and leadership roles previously closed to them. Despite these achievements, significant critiques and challenges persist. There remains a notable gap between formal legal equality and lived equality, where social and economic disparities continue to disadvantage women. The movements have been criticized for their historical exclusion of marginalized groups, including women of color, LGBTQ individuals, and those from lower socioeconomic backgrounds. Persistent cultural norms, media representations, and institutional biases continue to reproduce gender inequalities, often in subtle but powerful ways. Feminist gains are often vulnerable to political shifts and backlash, as evidenced by recent threats to reproductive rights in many countries. The movement must continue to adapt to new global, ecological, and digital realities, engaging with issues that transcend traditional gender politics. Section 4, the Philippine Women's Movement, a local context. To ground these theories in local experience, it is crucial to examine the unique history of women's rights in the Philippines, a history shaped by both global influences and its distinct colonial past. The roots of organized women's movements in the Philippines trace back to the early 20th century. The Asociacion Feminista Filipina, founded in 1905 by Concepcion Felix Rodriguez, was a pioneering organization that advocated for social welfare, education, and political equality for women from diverse class backgrounds. The suffrage movement was a key struggle. From the 1910s to the 1930s, Filipino women campaigned tirelessly for the right to vote. This culminated in a plebiscite on April 30, 1937, where the overwhelming participation of women secured their right to vote. An impressive 447,725 women voted in favor, far surpassing the 300,000 required to gain suffrage. This victory marked a critical milestone in the country's history. Following World War II and the end of colonial rule, women's participation in politics and civil society grew. The Philippine Commission on Women, PCW, was established in 1975, and the 1987 Constitution, drafted after the People Power Revolution, included key provisions on gender equality. Laws like the Women in Nation Building Act, RA 7192, were passed to ensure women's full integration into national development programs. More recent legal and social developments have focused on combating violence and expanding rights. The Anti-Violence Against Women and Their Children Act, RA 9262, and the Safe Spaces Act, which addresses harassment in public and online spaces, represent major legislative victories. The #BobbyAKO movement, which emerged in 2018, demonstrated the power of digital activism in pushing back against misogynistic remarks and policies. Section 5, Integrating Western and Philippine experiences, a comparative analysis. Comparing the Western feminist waves with the Philippine experience reveals both parallel struggles and distinct divergences shaped by unique historical contexts. Parallel struggles, different contexts. Like their Western counterparts, Filipino women fought for suffrage and legal equality, often drawing inspiration from global reform ideas. However, the colonial history under Spain and the United States introduced a different dynamic, where colonial authorities and local elites both enabled and limited the progress of women's rights. The struggle was not just against patriarchy but also against a colonial structure. The primacy of intersectionality. In the Philippines, intersectionality is not just a theoretical lens, it is a lived reality. The experiences of women differ significantly based on their class, urban-rural divide, indigenous identity, ethnicity, and religion. For example, while laws may exist to protect reproductive health, women in remote or impoverished areas often lack the access and resources to exercise these rights, highlighting the gap between law and implementation. The disconnect between law and implementation. The Philippines has strong, progressive laws on paper, such as constitutional equality and anti-violence legislation. However, the effectiveness of these laws is often limited by a lack of resources. Insufficient public awareness, societal stigma, and uneven enforcement. Cultural norms like machismo and deep-seated patriarchal expectations can undermine legal protections, demonstrating that legal change is only the first step. A shared digital frontier. The challenges and opportunities of the digital age are remarkably similar in both Western and Philippine contexts. The rise of digital gender-based violence, DGBV, including online harassment and disinformation, has emerged as a serious threat, particularly for women in public roles, such as journalists and politicians. This shared reality underscores the need for transnational feminist solidarity and cooperation to address issues that transcend borders, like online safety and privacy. Section 6. Contemporary Scholarship Theoretical Deepening. For students to be at the forefront of academic conversations, it's essential to understand how feminist theory is evolving in response to a changing world. Algorithmic bias. Research shows that gender stereotypes are not just a social problem, they are being encoded into technology itself. Studies reveal that AI systems used for image recognition, hiring, and even voice assistants can perpetuate biases, often reflecting a narrow, Western-centric view of gender and disproportionately disfavoring women of color. This finding provides concrete evidence for the critiques of transnational and intersectional feminists. Technology-facilitated gender-based violence, TFGBV. Recent scholarship, including that from Philippine media and human rights groups, confirms that online spaces, due to their unregulated and dispersed nature, have become new battlegrounds for harassment and abuse. Doxing, deepfakes, and coordinated harassment campaigns are increasingly used to silence and intimidate women, particularly journalists and activists. This demonstrates that protecting women's rights online requires a new legal and social framework. Evolving theoretical frameworks. Modern feminist theory is increasingly incorporating issues of environmental justice, migration, global health, and queer rights. The understanding that climate change disproportionately affects women and girls. That migration policies impact female refugees differently, and that health crises reveal gendered vulnerabilities, is now central to a comprehensive feminist analysis. Section 7. Implications for education students. What to teach, how to teach, what to build. For future educators, understanding this complex history is not just an academic exercise, it is a foundation for effective and ethical teaching. Here are the critical takeaways. Curriculum design. Integrate women's history and feminist perspectives into your curriculum. Go beyond the stories of famous women and include the histories of everyday women, those in rural areas, indigenous women, and overseas Filipino workers. Introduce students to feminist thinkers from the Philippines alongside Western scholars to provide a more nuanced understanding. Foster critical media literacy. Help students develop the skills to analyze media, from films to social media feeds, to identify gender stereotypes. representations of power, and subtle messages about gender roles. Teach them to ask, who is speaking? Whose voice is missing? What norms are being reinforced? This empowers students to be critical consumers of information and culture. Create inclusive classroom environments. Your classroom should be a safe space for all students, female, male, non-binary, to discuss gender issues. Use pedagogies that value diverse experiences, encourage respectful dialogue, and recognize the emotional as well as intellectual dimensions of these topics. Acknowledge that students come from different cultural and family backgrounds that shape their views on gender. Engage with digital rights. The digital world is the new frontier of gender activism and challenges. Teach students about online harassment, cybercrime laws, and digital privacy. Empower them to be responsible digital citizens who not only know how to protect themselves but also how to use technology as a tool for advocacy, organizing, and storytelling. Advocacy policy awareness. Help students understand that gender equality is a political and social project. Teach them how laws are made, what political participation looks like, and how social movements work. Encourage civic engagement and an awareness of local and national policies that impact women. Cultivate a long-term mindset. Rights are not permanent. They are often contested and require ongoing vigilance. Teach your students that achieving gender equality is an ongoing process that demands resilience, adaptation, solidarity, and a commitment to continuous learning. By integrating these historical, theoretical, and practical dimensions, you can prepare a new generation of educators who are not only knowledgeable about gender and society but are also equipped to build a more equitable world.